15 children vanished on a field trip in 1986. 39 years later, the school bus is found buried. The morning of the trip began with excitement that filled the air of the small town. It was the spring of 1986, and for weeks the children of Maple Grove Elementary had been waiting for this day. Their destination was not far, only about an hour's drive away. It was a nature reserve where children could learn about trees, birds, and the beauty of the nearby hills. For many of the 15 students chosen for this special trip, it was their first time going outside the town with their classmates. Parents arrived early with their children, some holding little lunch boxes, others carrying notebooks to draw the scenery. The bright yellow school bus stood at the front of the school, polished and ready for the journey. Its windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the smell of spring flowers mixed with the chatter of children who could hardly sit still. The teacher in charge, Miss Carter, stood near the bus door, checking the names on her clipboard. She was young and full of energy, and the children admired her because she always knew how to make learning fun. Behind her, the bus driver, Mr. Thompson, leaned casually against the door, greeting each family as they arrived. He had been driving buses for years and was known in town for his calm nature. Parents hugged their children tightly before they climbed onto the steps of the bus. Some mothers gave last-minute instructions: eat your sandwiches, don't forget your jacket, stay close to your teacher. Fathers gave little pats on the shoulder or ruffled hair, reminding their kids to enjoy the trip. Nobody knew those small gestures would be the last moments they would share. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was alive with energy. Children laughed, traded seats, and pressed their faces against the windows. A boy named Daniel showed his best friend a new disposable camera his parents had given him for the trip. A girl named Sarah carefully placed her stuffed bear on her lap, saying she wanted it to see the trees and flowers too. They spoke about how many birds they would count, and how much fun it would be to eat lunch outdoors. Miss Carter walked down the aisle, reminding everyone to sit properly, and Mr. Thompson adjusted the mirrors before starting the engine. The rumble of the motor filled the air, and the bus pulled out of the school driveway. Parents stood waving, some with cameras in hand, capturing the joyful scene. The waving hands grew smaller in the distance, and the yellow bus disappeared down the road. As the journey continued, the children sang songs, their voices rising above the steady hum of the engine. Some looked out at the rolling fields, pointing at cows grazing by the fences. Others whispered about what they might find in the forest's strange bugs, hidden trails, or maybe even animal footprints. Miss Carter kept the children busy by asking questions about nature. "What trees do you think we'll see?" she asked. Hands shot up eagerly, each child wanting to guess. The learning had already begun, even before they reached their destination. The town passed quickly behind them, and soon the road narrowed into winding lanes surrounded by thick woods. Tall trees arched above, their branches creating moving patterns of light and shadow across the windows. The bus seemed small in the endless green, but the children didn't notice. For them, every turn was part of the adventure. Back at the school, silence settled once the bus had gone. Teachers returned to classrooms with other students, while the principal, Mr. Harris, went about his duties. Parents returned to work or home, comforted by the thought that their children were in good hands. The trip was expected to end by late afternoon, when the bus would bring the children back, tired but happy, ready to tell their families everything they had seen. Hours passed, and the town went about its day. But as evening approached, parents began to gather again at the school, waiting for the yellow bus to appear at the gates. Some had brought snacks for their children, others carried small gifts, eager to hear stories from the trip. The sun lowered in the sky, painting the horizon with orange light. The bus should have arrived by now. At first, no one worried. Perhaps they were late, maybe traffic had slowed them down, or maybe the children were still enjoying a last-minute stop. Minutes turned into an hour. Parents shifted uneasily, asking each other if they had heard anything. The principal checked his watch repeatedly, then walked inside to call the nature reserve. The phone rang, but no one had seen the group arrive. Confusion grew into fear. How could the bus have left the school and never reached its destination? By nightfall, the calm of the town turned into alarm. Police cars arrived, lights flashing, and officers began asking questions. When did the bus leave? Which road was it supposed to take? Who last saw them? The answers were all the same: the bus had left on time, full of children, but no one had seen it since. Search teams were quickly formed. Neighbors, volunteers, and officers spread out along the roads, shining flashlights into ditches, calling out names into the darkness. Helicopters flew overhead, their spotlights sweeping across fields. Families stood huddled together near the school, praying for news. But as midnight came, there was nothing. No sign of the bus, no sound of children's voices, not even the faintest clue. It was as if the yellow bus had been swallowed by the earth. In the following days, newspapers covered the story, calling it one of the strangest disappearances in state history. Photographs of the 15 children filled the front pages, smiling faces with bright eyes, now missing. Reporters interviewed parents, teachers, and townspeople, all struggling to explain what had happened. For the families, the weight became unbearable. Some parents walked the roads themselves, searching every corner. Others sat silently in their children's rooms, staring at beds that remained untouched. The mystery had no answers, only questions that grew heavier with time. And yet, in that first day, before the shock had settled into grief, there was still a sense of disbelief. Parents told themselves the bus would appear at any moment, perhaps delayed by something simple. They looked down the empty road, expecting headlights to break through the night. But the road remained dark, the silence unbroken. The yellow bus that had left in the morning, full of laughter and promise, was gone. The night after the bus failed to return, the small town of Maple Grove was restless. Lights burned in every house, and families stayed awake, waiting for news that never came. The school, usually quiet after dark, had turned into a gathering place. Parents stood in groups, whispering, while others sat on the steps, holding each other's hands. Police cars lined the street, their radios crackling with updates, though no update brought comfort. The first hours of the search were filled with hope. Officers believed the bus might have broken down on a back road, perhaps hidden by the thick trees. Volunteers carried lanterns and flashlights, walking in lines through the fields. Others checked riversides and farm paths. Each time a car's headlights appeared in the distance, parents rushed forward, believing the missing bus was finally returning. But every time, it was only another search team or a neighbor bringing supplies. By dawn, hope had begun to fade. The bus had vanished without leaving a single clue. No skid marks on the road, no broken branches on the edge of the woods, no cries for help. It was as if the 15 children, their teacher, and the driver had simply disappeared into thin air. The local police called in state authorities by morning. Soon, strangers in uniforms arrived, setting up command posts with maps, radios, and long tables covered in files. The woods around Maple Grove, once a place of peace, now echoed with shouts of search teams and the sound of helicopters overhead. Families stood outside their homes, watching the sky as beams of light swept across fields and forests. Every parent clung to the same thought: they would be found. The bus must be somewhere, maybe hidden in a valley or stuck on a dirt road. But the hours stretched on, and still nothing appeared. Reporters began to arrive from nearby towns, their cameras pointed at tearful families. Microphones carried questions no one wanted to answer: what do you think happened? Do you believe your children are still alive? Some parents refused to speak, while others begged for help, their voices trembling as they described the clothes their children had worn that morning. Inside the school, the principal tried to keep the remaining students calm. Classrooms felt heavier without the missing classmates. Desks sat empty, their books still inside, as if waiting for the children to return. Friends of the missing kids whispered to one another, asking why the bus had not come back. Teachers struggled to explain, telling them only that the police were looking and that everyone must stay strong. Days turned into a week, and the search grew larger. Posters were printed with the faces of the missing children, taped to street lamps and store windows. Drivers passing through the area were stopped and asked if they had seen the yellow bus. Farmers searched their own barns and sheds, just in case. Airplanes circled overhead, scanning fields from above. Divers searched lakes and rivers, pulling up nothing but mud and weeds. The town, once known for its quiet charm, was now filled with visitors, reporters, and investigators. For families, life became a blur of waiting and questioning. Mothers sat by the phone, waiting for a call that never came. Fathers walked the roads until their shoes wore thin. Some parents kept the lights on all night, hoping that if their child somehow came home, they would not find the house dark and empty. Rumors began to spread. Some whispered that the driver had taken the bus somewhere far away. Others thought there must have been an accident hidden deep in the forest, a place searchers had not yet reached. A few even spoke of strange explanations, things beyond reason, but most dismissed those ideas quickly. People wanted answers that made sense, but no answer could be found. For the police, the case was unlike anything they had ever seen. Usually, a missing vehicle left signs, tire tracks, broken glass, pieces of metal. But this bus left nothing. It had rolled out of the schoolyard in full view of dozens of people, and then it was gone. Investigators questioned the few drivers who had been on the road that morning, but none of them had seen the bus pass by. It was as if the bright yellow vehicle, impossible to miss, had simply disappeared into the earth. The families clung to hope through those first weeks, but as time passed, hope became harder to hold. Some parents prayed together each evening at the local church, lighting candles for their children. Others sat silently at home, unable to speak. The absence of laughter, of footsteps running through hallways, made every house feel colder. The town itself seemed quieter, as though even the wind carried sorrow. The story spread across the state and then across the country. Newspapers ran headlines about the vanishing business. Television shows featured interviews with tearful parents. Strangers from far away sent letters, some offering comfort, others claiming they had seen visions or had dreams about where the children might be. The families read every word, desperate for a clue, but the letters brought no real answers. By the end of the first month, officials admitted they had no leads. The search area had been expanded far beyond the town, but still nothing was discovered. The bus, the teacher, the driver, and the 15 children remained missing. No tracks, no belongings, no sounds. Just silence. The community, once united in hope, began to feel cracks. Some believed the authorities were not doing enough. Others thought perhaps someone in town knew more than they were saying. Tensions grew in meetings, where parents demanded more action. The police promised they would not give up, but even their voices carried doubt. For the children who remained in Maple Grove, life had changed. They no longer ran to the bus stop with the same joy. Parents watched them more closely, afraid to let them out of sight. Some children asked when their friends would come back, not fully understanding what had happened. Teachers struggled to explain without frightening them further. As weeks turned into months, the case grew colder. Fewer reporters came, fewer officers patrolled. The families, however, never stopped waiting. They kept rooms untouched, toys in their places, clothes folded neatly, as if the missing children might walk in at any moment. Each season passed with the same heavy emptiness, and every anniversary of the disappearance reopened wounds that had never healed. The town became known not for its fields or its school, but for its mystery. People from outside came to see the roads where the bus had last been seen, as though walking there might reveal the secret. But the road gave nothing away. It was only pavement surrounded by trees, holding silence that no one could break. For 39 years, the mystery remained. Families aged, parents grew older, some passing away with unanswered questions. The story lived on in whispers, in books, in small news reports that appeared every few years. It became part of the town's identity, something every child grew up hearing about, even if they had not been alive when it happened. But in that first year, before decades turned the event into legend, it was pure pain. The families lived in uncertainty, every sunrise bringing the same question, where are the children? And every sunset closing with no answer. The bus had left the schoolyard with laughter and songs. It should have returned by evening. Instead, it became a memory, a wound, and a mystery too large for the town to bear. Years rolled forward, but the weight of the missing children never left Maple Grove. After the first frantic months of searching, life in the town tried to return to normal, yet normal never truly came. The sound of laughter in the schoolyard felt thinner, emptier, without those 15 voices. The classrooms carried a silence where their desks remained, and no new students were ever placed there. Teachers couldn't bring themselves to fill those seats with others, as though doing so would erase the memory of the missing. Parents of the children lived with a strange rhythm of hope and despair. Each morning they woke up believing that maybe today a letter would arrive, or maybe the phone would ring with news that the bus had been found. Each evening they went to bed with the same emptiness pressing against their hearts. Some parents held onto small belongings tightly, shoes left at the door, drawings taped to refrigerators, toys still scattered on bedroom shelves. These objects became sacred, reminders of the laughter that had once filled their homes. As the years passed, the grief took different shapes. A mother named Mrs. Miller never stopped baking her daughter's favorite pie every Sunday, leaving a slice on the table as if the girl might walk in at any moment. Mr. Carter, whose son had disappeared, spent years walking the back roads with a flashlight in hand, even long after search teams had given up. Others withdrew completely, unable to speak about the loss. Some families moved away, thinking perhaps distance would ease the pain, but no matter how far they went, the questions followed them. The town itself bore the scars. Every anniversary of the disappearance, a memorial was held in the church. Candles lined the altar, one for each child, along with a picture framed in gold. The services were quiet, filled with tears and long silences. The pastor always reminded the community that even without answers, they must hold on to one another. Yet as the years turned into decades, fewer people attended. Some couldn't bear the repetition of grief. Others had grown weary of hope that never brought results. Children who were not even born at the time of the disappearance grew up hearing the story whispered in their homes. They walked past the schoolyard and saw the old photographs of the missing children hung on the walls. They knew the names by heart, even though they had never met them. For them, the story was both frightening and fascinating, a mystery that seemed larger than life. Outsiders came to Maple Grove to ask about the case. Writers, reporters, even amateur investigators visited the town, walking the same roads, trying to imagine what had happened. Some interviewed the families, others studied the maps. A few published books, each with its own theory, but none with answers. Some said the bus must have been hidden in the woods. Others claimed it was taken far away, to a place no one would ever think to look. The more years passed, the more the story turned into legend, and with legends came strange ideas. Some whispered of unsolved mysteries beyond human understanding, while others blamed mistakes or secrets never revealed. But for the parents, it was not legend. It was personal, sharp, and endless. They could not rest without knowing. For every birthday that came and went, they imagined what their children might look like now, what clothes they would wear, what voices they would have, what dreams they might be chasing. They pictured graduations, weddings, futures that never happened. Each passing year was not just time, it was a reminder of all that had been stolen. Some of the families tried to rebuild. A few had more children, though the new lives never replaced the ones lost. Others buried themselves in work or community service, hoping that keeping busy would dull the ache. But the hole remained, as wide and heavy as the day the bus had disappeared. The school also carried the memory. Teachers told new students about the importance of safety, but the story of the missing bus always hung in the background. For many, it was their first experience with the idea that life could change in a single day. Some students grew afraid of field trips, refusing to board buses at all. Others grew curious, sneaking away to search the woods on their own, as though they might stumble upon the answer adults had missed. With every new decade, fresh investigators would sometimes revisit the case. Files were opened, interviews replayed, maps studied again. But the results never changed. No bus, no belongings, no trace of the 15 children or the 2 adults who had gone with them. The mystery remained whole, untouched by time. For the families, the hardest part was the not knowing. If the bus had been found, even in tragedy, they might have had peace. But the silence left them in an endless waiting room, unsure whether to grieve or hope. Some clung to the belief that their children were alive somewhere, grown up, and waiting to return. Others feared the worst but could not say it aloud. That uncertainty was its own kind of prison. By the 20th year, many of the parents had aged. Hair turned gray, faces lined with sorrow. Some passed away without answers, carrying their questions with them. Their neighbors attended funerals, whispering about how cruel it was to leave this world not knowing what happened to a child. The younger generation watched, understanding that grief was not something that faded with time. It stayed, as solid and heavy as stone. The town of Maple Grove became known across the region not for its farms or its festivals, but for its loss. When travelers passed through, they would sometimes stop at the old church where the memorial still stood. They would ask about the missing children, lowering their voices as though speaking too loudly might disturb something sacred. Residents of the town answered politely, but always with pain in their eyes. They lived not with a story, but with a wound. Even in the 35th year, the case remained alive in whispers. New detectives looked at the files, but nothing new ever came. The photographs of the children, once sharp and clear, had begun to fade with time, but their eyes still shone with youth, frozen in the spring of 1986. Their names were spoken less often, but they were never forgotten. For Maple Grove, time did not heal. It only added more years to the silence. Parents had grown old, siblings had built new lives, but the empty space remained the same size. The town carried the memory like a shadow that never left, no matter how bright the day. The bus that had left the schoolyard full of laughter never returned. The world moved on, but for the families, it always felt like they were still standing on that same road, still waiting for the sound of an engine in the distance, still hoping to see yellow paint glinting through the trees. And then, as the 39th year approached, something would finally break that silence. 39 years had passed since the yellow school bus disappeared from Maple Grove. In all that time, the small town had lived with silence, grief, and unanswered questions. Families had aged, and many of the original witnesses had moved away or passed on, but the memory of that spring day in 1986 never faded. Children who had been toddlers when the bus vanished were now adults, some raising their own families, yet the story remained a shadow over every life connected to it. It was a bright morning in late summer when the discovery happened. A construction crew had been hired to prepare farmland on the outskirts of town for a new housing project. Machines rumbled, dirt shifted, and the usual sounds of construction filled the air. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just ordinary work. Then, the excavator struck something solid beneath the soil. The machine stopped, and the workers crowded around, curious. At first, they thought it was an old piece of farm equipment or a forgotten trailer. But as they cleared the dirt, the shape of something familiar began to emerge. Rusted yellow metal, curved windows, and wheels buried deep in the ground. It was a school bus. Not any bus, but the very bus that had disappeared all those decades ago. Excitement mixed with disbelief. Someone called the police immediately. News spread through town like wildfire. Families who had lived with sorrow for almost 4 decades rushed to the scene, their hearts pounding. Could it really be true? After all this time, the missing bus was finally found. Investigators arrived quickly, cordoning off the area. Specialists in excavation and forensics examined the bus carefully before allowing anyone else near it. Cameras clicked, notebooks were filled with observations, and every inch of the buried vehicle was documented. It was remarkable that the bus had survived so long beneath the earth, its frame rusted but intact, as if the soil itself had protected it over the years. The families gathered quietly, some holding hands, others unable to speak. Tears streamed down faces that had long ago grown used to sorrow. The air was filled with emotion, relief, disbelief, grief, and a strange sense of closure all at once. For many, seeing the bus, even buried and aged, made the disappearance real again. It reminded them of the children, frozen in memory, whose lives had been interrupted so abruptly. Inside the bus, investigators discovered small belongings carefully preserved by the soil around them. A notebook with sketches, a stuffed toy, a lunchbox. The items brought back vivid memories for the parents. Every object told a story of a child who had been full of life, yet vanished without explanation. The scene was haunting and beautiful at the same time, a time capsule from the spring of 1986. The town of Maple Grove came alive with media attention. Reporters, television crews, and photographers arrived from across the region. Interviews were recorded, videos captured, and stories written about the miraculous discovery. Yet, for the families, it was not about headlines or fame. It was about finally facing the truth, even if the truth had not yet revealed all its secrets. Authorities promised a careful investigation. They explained that while the bus had been found, many questions remained. How had it ended up buried so far from the road? Why had no one noticed it before? What had happened to the children and adults inside? Specialists began examining the surrounding soil for clues, taking samples, and planning a methodical excavation to preserve every detail. For parents, seeing the bus was both heartbreaking and comforting. Some knelt near it, placing their hands on the cold, rusted metal, imagining the laughter of their children echoing across the years. Others simply stared, unable to believe that something that had been lost for nearly 4 decades was now standing before them. Memories rushed back: school mornings, hugs goodbye, voices calling from the bus steps, the excitement of a field trip. All of it had been paused, frozen in the soil, waiting to be found. The discovery brought the town together in a way that nothing else had since the disappearance. Neighbors helped keep the area clear, bringing chairs, umbrellas, and water for the families. Local restaurants provided food for the volunteers and journalists. Even those who had no direct connection to the bus felt the importance of the moment. Maple Grove, long marked by tragedy, now found itself at the center of hope and curiosity. Speculation ran wild. Some wondered whether the bus had been hidden deliberately. Others suggested it had slipped off a hidden path, unnoticed by anyone at the time. Investigators remained cautious, refusing to jump to conclusions. They reminded everyone that finding the bus was only the first step, and that discovering the truth behind its disappearance would take time. Despite the uncertainty, the discovery brought a sense of closure to families that had lived decades in pain. Some parents cried openly for hours, releasing emotions they had carried for nearly 40 years. Grandparents who had longed to see their grandchildren again held pictures against the bus, whispering names as if calling them to come home. It was a moment where past and present met, bringing the impossible into reality. As the day turned into evening, the community gathered near the bus, sharing stories and memories. People spoke of the children, recalling favorite games, favorite songs, and the way they had laughed. Teachers remembered Miss Carter, the young and kind teacher who had guided the students with warmth and patience. Drivers and volunteers remembered Mr. Thompson, who had cared deeply for each child on that fateful day. Everyone agreed that while the bus had been buried, the memories had never been forgotten. Investigators set up a controlled excavation for the next day, ensuring that nothing would be disturbed or lost. Cameras recorded every movement, and notes were taken to preserve the historical significance of the event. Archaeologists and forensic experts worked carefully, understanding that this discovery was unlike anything they had experienced. For the town of Maple Grove, the discovery became a turning point. The silence that had hung over decades was finally broken. Questions still remained, but the proof that the bus had existed, and that something significant had happened, was now undeniable. Families finally had a tangible connection to the past, something real to hold onto after so many years of uncertainty. Even as night fell, the bus stood there under the floodlights, a reminder of the children who had once boarded it and the lives that had been changed forever. The town slept uneasily, knowing that the next days would bring more answers and perhaps, new questions. But for now, there was a moment of awe, a feeling that after decades of waiting, the past had finally made itself visible. The discovery of the bus reminded everyone of the fragility of life, the strength of memory, and the power of hope. For nearly 40 years, families had waited, and now, finally, they had a reason to believe that answers were still possible. The story of Maple Grove, of 15 missing children, and of the yellow bus that vanished into the earth, had entered a new chapter. And though no one yet knew the full truth, the sight of the bus, buried yet preserved, gave the town a sense that the long, painful wait might finally lead to discovery, closure, and understanding.